Perfect. Well, first off, thank you guys for taking the time. Um, Today we're discussing defeating the too high, and we're discussing how offenses should adapt to the modern NFL defense. So our framework includes number one, setting the landscape, number two, understanding the playbook, and number three, assessing an actual game plan from a matchup between Buffalo and Minnesota. So let's look at the landscape. Our key finding is that 2 high usage spikes to 54% on long distance downs, but drops to just 24% in short yardage, which creates exploitable windows where defenses are most predictable. So now you can see that 2 high appears pretty linearly by different distance intervals, but by down, it's fairly consistent, and by score, it's also scales linearly. But the most effect and the biggest effect is distance. So again, the insight here is that 2 high scales linear with distance. Defenses also deployed 2 high more when leading, and that's just to prevent explosive plays and allow opposing offenses to rally back and to try to prevent that. Um, so we've seen a rise in too high safety coverage in the NFL. In 2018, Fangio's Bears popularized his too high shells. We got this data from Next Gen Stats. Um, but the combined passing yards per game dropped since then. So too high usage nearly doubled in under a decade. And the effect is huge. The combined passing dropped significantly, 19% in 4 years, and the coverage is working well and as designed. But it's used so much that actually it creates predictability that can be exploited. So we've seen that the death of man coverage, which has decreased by 6.8% in 3 years, and that's actually what fueled this too high boom. Um, Two high shells accounted for around 37% of all coverage snaps in our data, and that shift is accelerating. Cover two zone and cover four each saw significant increases since 2018. And you can see on the graph on the right that two high coverage as takes up a very big proportion and an increased proportion or percentage of the total plays over time.
Okay, so as we can see, the too high strategy is being applied more and more frequently in the recent seasons. So why does that happen? Basically, the offense strategy now is leaning more towards the vertical isolation passes, and in this case, the too high strategy will respond like well on releasing the stress on defense players compared to single high strategy, and also providing the defense players with more flexibility when changing roles and making the offense players to like hesitate more because the roles are more ambiguous and they will like need more time to decide what to do next. And as for the next slides, we're going to show the like analysis on the usage of the too high strategy. The bar charts shows like the Minnesota Vikings is using too high strategy noticeably more frequent than the other teams, while the Cleveland Browns are having the lowest usage. The dash line in the middle indicates that around one third of an NFL team's defense is relied on too high strategy in average. And as for the efficiency, the too high strategy is shown by the analyzing the EPA when using the too high strategy. Then Cincinnati is having 0.442 as the average EPA for too high strategy, which is super high and it requires like much better performance from the defense players. And although the Minnesota Vikings is having the most usage in the too high strategy, the efficiency of the strategy is kind of just around the middle. So it is much more important for the teams to identify the most suitable conditions and apply the too high strategy instead of just relying on too high strategy too much.
Next, we're going to go over some offensive strategies that we found effective against UI. So some findings that we found was that post routes were very effective against UI, and the surprising thing, personnel grouping against UI was the 13 personnel with one running back and three tight ends. So as you can see, 13 personnel was very effective against Shu Hai, posting a net positive of 0.96 EPA versus Shu Hai. However, that's on a smaller sample size compared to 11 personnel, which generated an overall EPA of 0.69 at a much larger sample size. So as you can see, the higher usage of Shu Hai grouping for certain personnel grouping like 13 and 11 personnel netted in a much higher EPA per play compared to other personnel groupings. Next. Therefore, offenses should target the upper right quadrant of this chart in order to create more successful plays when defenses stay in Shu Hai. Next, we're going to look at dropback type. 7-step dropback was the most effective because it gave receivers time to challenge the deep zones, and quick game with 1-step dropback usually exploited the defense getting into their zones in time. But it all breaks down. The quarterback can scramble, which generated a very high EPA of 0.496 on average. Next, we're going to look at the different Shu Hai coverages in a Shu Hai. So in man versus zone cover 2 comebacks were very effective against zone cover 2s, attacking the sidelines. But in man cover 2, that was way down. Instead, teams are better trying to attack the shallow routes, shallow crossers. And then finally, the main vulnerability with cover 4 was the corner routes exploiting the quarters coverage boundaries. However, the main takeaway is that the post route is very effective against both zone cover 2 and man cover 2, but less so against man cover 2.
All right, so now we're going to look at actually what routes beat Shu Hai. So, like Jerry said, post routes pretty much dominate, and that's because they allow the receivers and the quarterbacks to target an area of the field that has empty space and green grass. So, the best route combinations are the ones that allow the offense to target one player on defense and make them make a decision between two players, leaving one player open. So this kind of idea can be summed up in two things. Number one is a vertical stretch. So making sure that you have vertical routes inside your play design that really stretch the defense vertically, but also you stretch it horizontally. So that's shallow crossers, that's putting flat routes out there to then free up spots for people to find room in the zones. So as you can see on the right or on the left, sorry, there's a positive correlation between usage rates of targeted receivers and the Shu Hai effectiveness of those routes. That means that route concepts with posts as a first receiver option lead to more successful plays against Shu Hai coverage. You can see this kind of like vertical um, line that has most of the plays, and that just means that those plays are used around the same rate. And posts and verticals have a very successful EPA for that. On the right, you can see this is the total cumulative EPA on that specific targeted route. Hooks are targeted a lot. They get a lot of volume and they have a slight uh, positive EPA. So they have the biggest total cumulative EPA. And checkdowns, when targeted, have a very low EPI. But I specifically said when targeted because checkdowns are really important in preventing or in stretching vertically. So you have stretches vertically with receivers going deep, but you also want to stretch it vertically by having people sitting down so that people in flat routes will bite down and free up space behind. Here's a great example of a play design that we would call if we had cover 2. So we have an immediate man beater with X and with the person in the slot on the right with a post and a slant. And what the receiver on the right, what the right hand receivers are doing is they're creating a conflict for R, and they're making R decide. Should it take the post or should it take the vertical? What H is doing is it's creating it's making sure that F stays in that specific zone, leading for the post to be open against cover 2, cover 4, and cover 2 man. Um, So here are the optimal combinations that we found. Yes, there's not a crazy big sample size, but in general, these route combinations have worked really well. You have a levels concept, that's number one, a dual verticals concept, a mesh or rub concept, and then a smash concept. But the common thread through all of these is that every top combination has at least one vertical or post element and one horizontal stretch. The vertical freezes the safeties, and the horizontal stretches linebackers. So these are the top six most effective route combos. Um, and as an interesting note, all hook and curl route combinations generate around the same EPA against two eye coverages. Um, Even though it plays right into what you would think two eye coverage would prevent. So in all, here's our two eye counter playbook is we use 11 personnel, we attack vertically, we stretch horizontally, we actually mix depth drops and drop depths, I mean, because you want to have some plays where you have 7 steps drops if you have time to then hit that post route, hit the vertical route, keep the safeties honest. And you also want to read the sub shell. Cover two, it's great to attack middle. You can also attack middle with cover four, but you also can attack boundaries pretty successfully. So finally, the game plan. So we're analyzing the Buffalo Bills and the Minnesota Vikings. Um, this is where our other person was supposed to present along with the beginning. So forgive me if there's a few missteps. Um, so the Vikings use cover two a lot, as we previously analyzed. Um, Cover two and cover three are their biggest uses, and they use two eye safeties a lot as well. When the Vikings uh, if you're going against the Vikings, in a heavy combo, you want to increase your post and crossing routes. And if they're in a low too high, you want to spread them and take more deep shots. So here's another play design. We have 12 people on the field just to show there's lots of different combinations of routes that you can go. But in general, having a clearing route, having a post to help target one safety and make them pick, having different horizontal stretches, hooks to kind of stay in the zone and uh, and keep the defense honest, and then also implementing some flats to pull down the defenders and let those deeper crossing routes hit home. So what this does is it creates a safety conflict, it creates a linebacker conflict, and a flat defender conflict. So 11 personnel is the best to do this because it's a balanced alignment, and it has been shown to be the most effective against two high safeties. So our key takeaways is two high is not monolithic, meaning that they have different weaknesses. Um, but in general, using post routes more and making sure you stretch vertically and horizontally is critical. Um, Using 11 personnel allows you to maximize your optionality. If they think pass, you still have the inside zone run to really hit home if there's a weak box. And then mixing these drop depths will prevent the defense from cheating up or cheating down. If you have quick passes and the safeties are staying back, then you have time to if the safeties are staying back, you'll have more space. And keeping vertical routes and into your package, make sure that they don't cheat down too much as well. And the Vikings are over relying on too high. So without their elite execution, and they're ranked ninth, there's a clear exploitable tendency for teams to target. So thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, I just want to start off by saying I thought that this was a really well thought out presentation, guys. Good work. I think the part that I enjoyed the most was looking at the optimal route combinations. I thought that that was pretty unique, um, and it was different as opposed to looking at each route individually. You were looking at them as a whole, which I believe in that concept as well. So I thought that that was really unique. Yeah, I don't have any questions currently. I don't know if Matt or Alex, if you guys have any questions, but could
Well,
probably
I'd start
piggyback
off by saying
off
I
of you
thought the
guys.
exact same thing. I had written down when you were going over the individual routes, like how do they affect one another, and then you addressed it and nailed it. Really knocked that part out. I thought it was a really good understanding of how not just routes interact with each other, but also how they interact with coverages. So great job on the football understanding, and also beautiful slideshow. Really, really good visually. Um, One question I had was, um, how did you look at sort of like garbage time and how that might impact things? And then also, in a similar vein, there was the bit about 13 personnel kind of surprisingly being something that faced a lot of too high this year, and there was some positivity there. Is your opinion that that's probably small sample, biased by a particular team that ran a lot of 13, that sort of thing? Or is that something you think there might be some meat on the bone to look into that further?
Yeah, those are two great questions. I think we'll address them one at a time. So I'll let Jerry take the second question. But in regards to your question about garbage time, we did really consider different factors about where the play was running on the field. So, for example, in the red zone, right, you'll definitely have a decrease in too high because you're in a compressed set, or the field is really compressed, so you don't have that vertical element. So we did kind of have to filter that out. We also filtered out in some instances, and that's why there was different numbers that we referenced. Um, Garbage time. So we looked at when the teams, I think, were within 14 points for a lot of our data, just so that we could make sure that it's actually real game and like the actual insights, and we can extrapolate those to so the entire project. And then Jerry's going to talk about 13 personnel.
Yeah, so I think this could be this is both like a from a football standpoint and like a analytic standpoint. Analytically, like there's a smaller sample size for 13 personnels. So maybe it could get skewed by some plays that maybe could have potentially like a trick play or something like that. But also from a football standpoint, I think because it's more because 13 personnel, like two defenses are expecting a run because you have three tight ends on the field, which means extra blockers for more run versatility. So I think defenses aren't really expecting a pass. If so, they'll just stay in their too high coverages. So that I think that's why it contributed to like a smaller sample size compared to 11 personnel.
Makes sense.
Um, I'll also like to echo just kind of what they said about you guys did a really good job, really enjoyed the presentation. One question I had sort of kind of along the same lines of like where you guys had multiple routes, um, just kind of broken out instead of like individual ones. For that, if you guys like had more time, I guess, how would you go about understanding kind of the different depths that each route needs to kind of basically take advantage of the zones that you're targeting? So I guess I didn't get to read each line super in depth, but kind of understanding like, hey, you need one deep route to pull a safety while you also need underneath routes. Like, what would kind of be the next step off of some of those routes and maybe even creating like more combinations that teams haven't seen?
So just to clarify, you're asking like specifically, like how would we, with more time or more data, like decide how far the route should be going and like what more specifically?
Yeah,
Is
just
that?
kind of like along those lines, like how,
Mhm,
where do you take kind of the next step on that part? I
mhm.
think like laying out the routes was a very nice, just like coach facing piece, like, hey, these are the routes that work best. But how would you understand like kind of the timing aspect it takes for a deep route and an under route? And then like what realistically can we get done?
Mhm. That's a great question. I imagine everyone here has had experience with the data bowl and having play-by-play real-time data. So, given the data that we were able to use, um, we couldn't really explore that question, and we also had a big time constraint. But it would be really interesting to really see, like, in terms of XY coordinates, like where are they getting to, and what is the time to that throw to really dive into the specifics. So the next step would be, okay, we're looking at these route combinations, like specifically on that play, if you have a levels concept, right? What are you, where's the ball going typically? Why is it going there? And then you can look where that person is on the XY plane and on the field. So I think looking at real-time data would be the next step in really understanding. We can really look at from a bigger perspective, which is what we did this entire presentation on what combinations work. But to your question, specifically, what specific like elements make that play work from like a granular perspective would be more play-by-play data, like real time, which would be a really interesting avenue to explore.
Mhm.
Now I had one other question that more philosophical. Kind of goes back to that 13 personnel being potentially underrated due to sample size. Do you see a potential shift in that trend in the near future? Because football is always about trends, and is it the beginning of a potentially a new trend? Is getting into those heavier personnels and maybe exploiting some of these too high looks using these 13 personnels. Maybe it's certain different tight ends, whether there's some guys that are more inline, bigger tight ends, and then you mix those with some of the more athletic tight ends. Just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on if there's maybe potential way to maybe like project how effective 13 personnel could be in the future if given a bigger sample size. And obviously scheme dependent and time dependent in the game. So
Yeah, I think from philosophical standpoint, um, I I guess it all comes down to what the coaches like and what the offensive want to scheme around. Um, like most of the time, like sometimes coaches want receivers that can just win against any corner on defense. But I guess like you also need in order for like 13 personnel to work, you need like I guess the right players, like basically in a sense, like the word personnel. Um, you need the right personnel for like a receiving tight end that can be diverse. I mean, a hybrid in like both blocking and receiving. Um,
Mhm.
so like I think that could like definitely like open up more things for the defense to consider. Um, so defenses have to adjust on the fly against like maybe 13 personnel, and sometimes their
Yeah.
adjustments be might be a little off based on what the coaches want to call
And
on
Jerry, can
offense.
I add on to that?
Yeah.
Just as like a case study, I think the Seahawks and staying in nickel pretty much most of the year, and still being able to kind of stop the run, teams are going to have to adjust to that and are going to have heavier personnel um, as the counter because if they're willing to just stay in a kind of cornerback heavy defense and fill in the run gaps, then the best way to counter that is just to pound the rock early and get into these heavy personnels. So we saw a rise and after Fangio implemented kind of the too high as like a meta. And obviously you mentioned like there's these fluctuations, right? It's a cat and mouse game between the offense and defense and trends over time. So to your question specifically, we would expect there would be a rise of 13 personnel given if teams are going to stay in too high safety and not really have many players in the box.
One
Yeah,
thing,
oh, I just want to add on to that. Like also if the run game is effective, you can use play action off those runs in order to suck the defense in, which could open up the deeper halves of the field when the safety is trying to come down into the box and stop the run.